Now let's talk instead about the NGF and the next generation weapon system. We say that France has the means to do it alone. In fact, we have everything we need to create this aircraft. Our defense industrial and technological base is very rich in know-how, in its engineers, its technicians, its workers, and it is capable of producing the finest tools in the world. Let's be proud of this French defense industrial and technological base, which is one of the best in the world and capable of doing everything. Let's protect it. A general shouldn't be saying this. I think it's a president who should be saying this. I've received messages myself, but are our children really going to die? Frightened mothers, is there going to be a war? No, I reassured them. We dissolved dozens of regiments, closed dozens of bases, and reduced everything to the lowest level. I think we've never had so few planes since the end of World War II. I believe that the normal state of countries is to always be vigilant and always in competition.
Hello everyone. A brief message before this interview with Deputy Frank Giletti, Vice President of the Defense Committee. First of all, to thank him for accepting this invitation. The same goes for the next interview with Arnaud Legal, Deputy of La France Insoumise. Some may wonder why start interviews with La France Insoumise and Rassemblement National. Terabellum has invited deputies and senators from the Socialist, Ecologist, Renaissance Center and Republican parties. And none of them wanted to respond to our invitation, except for those from Rassemblement National and La France Insoumise.
Si vous souhaitez nous voir invités,
Our deputy and senator, our mailbox is open to everyone, regardless of their political affiliation. Terabellum also stands for a diversity of opinions. Thank you for your trust, and we wish you an excellent viewing experience. Mr. Deputy, hello. Thank you for accepting our invitation for this new series that we're launching today on Terabellum. Let's get straight to the point in this video. The change at the head of the Directorate General of Administration, which saw Emmanuel Shiva leave, how do you analyze it? Is it an attempt to reassure the left? Is the 2024-2030 military programming law under threat, as well as its associated additional measures? Or is it final, just a storm in a teacup for you?
So, in my opinion, it's a matter of position. I'm not in the inner circles of power. To know exactly the reason for this departure, in my opinion, you have to link it with the appointment of a new minister, a new female minister. But maybe from what I've heard here and there could be several reasons that might explain this departure or this change, this replacement. The first is that Emmanuel is not someone who is from here, from the Corps of Polytechnicians. And we know that at the Directorate General of Administration, the Polytechnicians have a kind of hold over this department. And maybe they preferred to see one of their own rather than this somewhat iconoclastic entrepreneur. At the head of the General Directorate for Armament, it could also be in the context of a change of Minister of the Armed Forces. Maybe Ms. Vautrin wanted to put her mark, her stamp on this by appointing, for example, the person who was her chief of staff. That makes sense, but still, in my opinion, that's how I feel about it. But again, not being in the majority, not being in the inner circles of power, I think the Prime Minister, the former Minister of the Armed Forces, former Defense Minister, still has a benevolent outlook, and I have proof of that. Just yesterday, we were invited to Brienne with some parliamentarians, senators, and deputies in the presence of the Minister of the Armed Forces. But it was organized by the Prime Minister to talk to us about the situation in the world and in France, and the attitude that France should have regarding this complicated global situation. We're talking about rearmament and numerous cases of rearmament and but also, internally, maybe some criticism for not having sufficiently implemented the war economy wanted by Emmanuel Macron, which was declared just like that in a car on the way to Le Bourget without having thought it through beforehand. It's baseless, and as we've seen, there are no effects. A war economy requires being at war and providing the necessary means, which the government isn't doing. Everything would need review. Working hours, regulations, and both administrative and regulatory simplification. But that hasn't happened. though there have been some successes. But that's because these industrialists are under stress, but not so much because of the presidential declaration about the war economy. They are under stress because they have a lot of orders and they have to adapt. And if they want to keep their market share, they have to respond to these orders quickly. I'm thinking of MBDA, I'm thinking of Dassault and all those big French companies in the defense industry, and that need help. We need to help them by giving them a vision, by giving them an order book they can rely on, which is not the case today. Their production is mainly for export. But we also need to, and this comes from my meetings with the leaders of this defense industrial and technological base, simplify, simplify, simplify.
You're talking about public orders, and indeed that's very important for our defense industrial and technological base. What is the Rassemblement National's position on the future combat air system today?
Well, first, I think we need to clearly define the terms. The future combat air system is really a system of systems. But within the future combat air system, there's the next generation weapon system, which is the combat platform, the NGF, but also the combat cloud and the weaponry that comes with us. The future combat air system is a reality. Tomorrow, we will need a system of systems that is connected and interconnected on the battlefield to create a connectivity bubble for that battlefield. The future combat air system is about planes, different planes, drones, but also ground elements that will be connected. Okay, we're moving toward that, but we're still far from it. We're working on it. That's one thing. Now let's talk about the NGF and the next generation weapon system. The NGF is the platform, and we clearly say that France has the means to build the platform on its own. In other words, this future aircraft, and I'm only talking about the aircraft itself, we can do it because we might have the best aircraft manufacturer in the world, with Dassault, of course, but also companies like Thales for combat and navigation systems. And we also have MBDA for weaponry. In fact, we have everything we need to create this aircraft and make it high-performing to be this sixth-generation aircraft that France must acquire sooner or later. Now, the next-generation weapon system is also about the framework for armaments. The thinking, perhaps, and this is our position, is about collaborations with other countries, because typically this conglomerate is made to work with several parties. In terms of interoperability, we know that today all operations are rarely carried out alone, but rather with several parties. In a coalition, we are part of several coalitions. I'm mainly thinking of NATO, but also sometimes with missions assigned by the European Union. So regarding these systems, but still making sure always, and that's, you asked me about our position in the national rally. If I have to sum it up, it's always about interoperability. It's in the interest of the French armed forces and of France, of these industries, these soldiers, and these vital or essential interests. So that's our axiom, that's the foundation. It's always the interest of the French people. That means not sacrificing its companies, not transferring its technologies, that these industries continue to produce in France, provide jobs for the French people, bring in tax revenue, taxes, and employment. So that's our basic premise. So, about the future combat air system, yes, the NGF, we say that we can do it. And about this combination of connectivity, cloud, combat, weaponry, and platform, why not consider collaborations? We are criticized for criticizing collaborations, but there are some that work very well, and we say so. I'm thinking of MBDA, which was a great success. When it's defined beforehand, when we have the same vision, when there's a project leader and we give ourselves the means, we can succeed. The problem with future combat air system is that it was a political decision, this famous Franco-German partnership that everyone absolutely wants to keep going. It looks like a patient in therapy at the end of life that we're desperately trying to keep alive. For some reason, we don't know why. It's purely ideological. Now, we're saying it doesn't work. Main ground combat system, future combat air system wanted by Emmanuel Macron. Let me remind you, future combat air system is an idea from 2017 when Emmanuel Macron came to power. So, without reason, without any need for our armies, no, we are against it. On the other hand, well thought out cooperation, once again with a common goal, a shared operational need, a project leader as well, and a budget that is set in advance. Yes.
Thank you. You partially share Eric Trappier's concerns, who, in the Defense Committee, had notably denounced Germany's intention, through Airbus Defense, to take the lead on the project, and had accused Dassault of wanting to take over the entire project, at least for the jet part, for the fighter aircraft part.
Thank you. Yes. Eric Trappier, whom we see quite regularly at trade shows, who is quite present in the committee. Various finance committees, but also armed forces and defense committees, are defending a French company. It's one of the rare companies with a very French model, that is to say, a family-run model that is successful and independent. And maybe it's this independence that allows it to say things that others can't say and to speak the truth. And it's truth that our defense industrial and technological base is very rich in know-how in its engineers, its technicians, and its workers, and that it is capable of producing the finest tools in the world. Let me remind you that in France we are capable of making a nuclear-powered submarine, a missile launcher, an aircraft like the Rafale, or even sending satellites into space thanks to Ariane 6. And so we know how to do it, we have this expertise, we just need to give ourselves the means. And let's be honored, let's be proud of this French defense industry, which is one of the best in the world and capable of doing everything. So let's protect it. It brings in revenue, it allows us to export. To make sure our trade balance isn't too much in deficit, because if it is very much in deficit, it could be even worse. If we didn't have the luxury in defense sectors, so let's invest. Sorry, €1 invested brings in 2 or 3 euros. We don't know the exact returns, but we know they exist. So yes, Eric Trappier is right. Let's defend this French model, this French entrepreneurial vision, because it deserves it.
Let's go back, if you don't mind, to General Mandon's remarks, which have certainly caused a stir in the political class and more generally in society. Beyond the remarks, today, how can we reconcile preparing for a high-intensity conflict, which has been a concern since 2022, the defense effort, and maintaining society's trust? For example, in the army, or more generally in national defense?
Thank you, everyone. Well, regarding General Mandon's statements, I think he went a bit too far. Beyond what a general should say. A general shouldn't say that. I think it's a president who should say that. A minister should say that, but maybe not a general. He's finding his footing. He was just appointed chief of staff. Maybe we can understand his desire to shake things up a bit, to encourage the French population to be more resilient, to be more combative. Some people were still worried since I received messages asking, are our children really going to die? Frightened mothers? Is there going to be a war? No, I reassured them. So I don't think it had the effect the general wanted, but instead caused more anxiety. Now that we need to prepare the French people, and that's something that always needs to be done. And now we're suffering from the dividends of peace. From those years when we lacked ambition, we lacked vision, we lacked courage, while other nations were rearming themselves, China, Russia, the United States never abandoned their defense industry. We kept training, kept producing, all within that end of history vision so dear to Fukuyama. We thought it was happy globalization and the end of history, where universal peace would reign over the world. And the world, the planet, that's not true without invoking a clash of civilizations. I believe that the normal state of countries is to always be vigilant and always in competition. Competition is the very nature of countries that can coexist. Since then, you always had to give your all, which we've forgotten. We dissolved dozens of regiments, closed dozens of bases, and reduced everything to the lowest level. I believe we've never had so few planes since the end of World War II. Our armies have been cut to the bone. To prioritize other policies, like those on immigration and urban policy whose results we can see today, that is to say, close to nothing. Or on the contrary, or even worse, even when our armies would have needed it, because there is this strong connection that ties it all together. You know, today when we ask the French what they really believe in and what matters to them, it's the military, the police, the firefighters. That's it. That's the model. The French have in mind this model of order, discipline, dedication, sacrifice, and that's what they believe in. That's why I believe that today we're asking the French to make more efforts through the budget, so through taxes. But I think there's a real acceptance of this effort by the French because they still believe in it. You see, they hardly believe in justice, in politics, in education, in healthcare anymore. But when it comes to the military, they still believe. And that's good news. Well, that's the French spirit, I hope, and we have to maintain it. So how should we maintain it? Through awareness campaigns. I agree that regiments should open their doors because every time there have been events, I think, no, for me, it's the shock in the Var district. I have a great regiment called the Civil Security Intervention and Training Regiment Number 7. They have open house days in May and June, and it's wonderful. They bring in dash planes, Canadair planes, and fire trucks. And the kids, even the older ones, come out of there amazed because it makes you want to do it. The 100 years of naval aviation were also celebrated elsewhere, and it was a great success. We make people want to, and we create this connection between... We create a connection between the French people and their army. We need to develop this activity further. That goes through the reserves, which we really need to provide with resources. Because today, I know there's a desire to strengthen the reserves. But it's clear that they don't necessarily have the resources, and the equipment doesn't keep up with the missions either. It's complicated because reservists also need to be supervised by active duty soldiers. And we know that active duty soldiers, because of the accumulation of operational contracts and missions, don't necessarily have the means to supervise and lead these reservists. Still, I think it's necessary. And then there will be this new voluntary military service, which is a step in the right direction, because it can provide structure for young people who want to serve and get involved. I'm in favor of it. It's going to have a cost. We need to be aware of that, and sacrifices will have to be made, but it contributes to the survival of the nation, to recreating that strong bond between the French people, the nation, and its armed forces.
And to conclude, do you think that the current budget uncertainties are affecting the daily lives of the forces, recruitment, retention? Could this worry a certain number of people beyond just civil society, more generally the active duty military personnel?
No, but I understand that they are worried. We parliamentarians are also worried. We are in a period of uncertainty. The budget has not been voted on, and it is not close to being voted on. In my opinion as well, the Prime Minister is playing on this because he knows the subject well, being a former member of the armed forces. He's putting a bit of pressure on the parliamentarians to get this budget voted through, because he says that one of the important points of the 2026 budget is the C-step, the extra funding for our armed forces, but at the same time, a budget is overall. Not everything can be focused on the armed forces, even though I think there would be ways like we did last year with the special law. And then to vote on a budget to give back the resources that are necessary for the military. I understand that they are in a great period of uncertainty because they need resources to train with ammunition, but also capabilities. And now we see that capabilities take time to produce, because this can be explained by many reasons: inflation costs, rising prices of raw materials, the technical complexity of this equipment. I also believe there is a willingness. And for that, we can give credit to the Directorate General of Administration and the government for investing in cheaper products, but more consumables. As we see during the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, lower cost drones, to be more agile in the design, manufacturing, and production of these products, which are less high-tech than what we know how to make, than a Rafale and sous-marin nucléaire lanceur d'engins or a Leclerc, but which will also be necessary on tomorrow's battlefield to saturate, to create a contested space. So yes, France needs to equip itself with significant resources. Marine Le Pen has always said it in her 2022 program. She had it in her platform. That was the amount that was given. It was the amount of the current LPM, knowing that it didn't take into account the consequences of inflation. So she was completely confident. The needs that the armed forces were demanding, and rightly so, to rearm, because, in the finance bill, the word rearmament is mentioned 55 times. And there won't be more equipment at the end of 2026 than at the beginning of 2026. There will be 2 additional Rafale jets that have been ordered, but that's just to replace the unfortunate loss from the accident involving those 2 Rafale jets. But we won't have more ships, more planes, or more tanks.